Okay, we're going to go ahead and get this grading training started. So I think most people are going to watch this later, but thank you guys for being willing to do this way. Contact me via email or check in with me if you have any questions. And let's not waste any time. So I am going to go over to the grading presentation. And so Mesa Public Schools is very committed to making sure that we have fair and equitable grading practices that push our students towards success. And so one of the things that we would have done as a group is discuss the purpose of grading. And one thing that we might want to be mindful of is that grading or grades represent very different things to students, teachers, and parents, and different things to students, teachers, and parents with different experiences or different education philosophies. And so what we have to be careful of is often we are guilty of assuming or acting based on assumptions on how students understand and interpret their grades and on what could be successful with grading just because it's the experience that we had growing up. The other thing for us to think about is if you have that packet, you can see most of the information that we're going to cover in this. So it's just important that you read through that. But Mesa Public Schools has laid out, and I understand that some of you are struggling to live this live, so I'll make sure that I just share this out after. Mesa Public Schools has laid out what your responsibilities are as a teacher with regard to grading. So you see words highlighted like equitable and specific, accurate, timely. So the key pieces that I pull away from teacher responsibilities are that we want to be able to tie students' grades to their achievement and or comprehension of specific standards. And we want to be careful to avoid approaching grading in a way that is based mostly on student attitude or other things that are more nebulous and hard to quantify. We want grades to be actionable, and we want grades to reflect the proficiency that students have, and then our grading practices to support students making growth and improvement. So the first area that we are focusing on as a district is the opportunity for retest and redo. And what that looks like is we need to start developing grade level age appropriate standards that allow students to have multiple opportunities to demonstrate their mastery of a given content area. A variety of different things. That could be students taking a test, those who did not achieve mastery being given an alternate test, or being allowed another experience that tests them on the same set of standards. Now, it's important when engaging in this that you make sure that we don't get overwhelmed by this. You can't obviously keep creating tests endlessly. To make sure that it's not just a routine where the student's going to take another test and fail again, kind of like we talked about with PBIS, where intervention is not truly taking place and we're just retesting without intervening. And so procedures need to be developed so that the students are thoughtful and reflective about their mistakes, and from that are able to try again and demonstrate mastery their second time. And you can see the do's and don'ts sort of break down around making sure it's a meaningful, authentic opportunity for retesting. And what needs to be avoided is being unfair or biased in our approach to either not allowing retests or redo opportunities at all, or siphoning or limiting that based on sort of personal preference. The next area of emphasis, broad area of emphasis for our grading practices, late work and the use of a zero. So no matter what your grade level is, an important thing to understand is that it is not appropriate to simply assign a zero when a student does not complete an assignment. The proper remediation, or excuse me, the proper intervention for students not wanting to do work is not giving them a zero, because that actually just reinforces that behavior. They get a zero. If that's not meaningful to them, they just move on. That's not an intervention that's going to change behavior. The consequence for a student not wanting to do assigned work is to have them do assigned work. And so the approach to work that is late or missing needs to be a process or a procedure through which Students are given time and space to do work that they otherwise would not have done and received a zero. A great example that I would like to give, a structure that I like, comes from Miss Weston's classroom. In her classroom, they were doing Genius Hour, and students were engaging in some very interesting self-selected projects at a certain time in each day. However, in order for students to be eligible to participate in that Genius Hour experience, they needed to have all their missing or late work completed. And so students that were right with that were able to participate in Genius Hour, and students who weren't and had it passed off, but instead that time, that space was allocated so that those students could get the help and support from the teacher they needed, and that they were still held responsible for completing the work. Next area to be aware of is homework. We do not grade homework. And in our approach to homework, we want to be thoughtful about what is equitable or appropriate for students who may not have as much support, assistance from parents or other family members as we feel would be ideal to help them to complete homework. And so approaches that can be more effective are routines such as a reading log or multiplication log that they can be primarily responsible for, or work that they are capable of completing independently without the need of guidance or teaching from their parents. So in our approach to homework, we don't grade homework, and also we make sure that our homework is scaffolded ability-wise so that our students could be successful completing it even without the help of an adult or someone who's experienced with that content. An exception might be if there's a long-term project, it's appropriate that some students could be working on that at home as long as there's time and space and support provided so that students who aren't capable of working on that at home have the ability to complete it during school hours. The next thing that we need to understand is the difference between formative and summative assessments. So formative assessments are building up, are assessments that students take along the way that help to inform our instruction. And summative assessments are the capstone. They're the final analysis of whether mastery was achieved or not. And so you see some of the recommendations. We do need to incorporate summative assessments into our achievement, into our measures of students' achievement progress, into our grades, but our grades should not only be based on summative assessments. So an example of this that would be inappropriate is if a grade level were to decide, well, it would be a lot simpler if we just use their STARS benchmark score each quarter for their math and ELA grade. That wouldn't be an appropriate practice, even though you can argue about it being directly connected to skills and mastery level. What you need to do is you need to have an appropriate blend of evidence that students have mastered the standard incrementally along the way, and then that summative capstone showing the level of mastery that they have achieved overall. One of the things that we need to distance ourselves from is behavior-driven grading. One of the easiest things that you can eliminate right away is if you have an effort score or something non-quantifiable along those lines that factors into the way that you grade, that needs to be eliminated. Another example would be things like giving excessive extra credit, and in fact most forms of extra credit would not be allowed. Instead, retest or redo would be an appropriate way for a student to impact their grades in a positive way, but particularly extra credit that takes the form of students completing a task that's desired and receiving points towards their grade in return. That is not recommended and is not allowed per our policy. That's an appropriate place where use of behavior tickets or class-wide or individual incentives would be great, but we address behavior using the behavior route. We address grades and student proficiency and academic mastery through the academic route, and those two silos need to remain separate. Now, does that mean we ignore student behavior? It's not mentioned or discussed or approached? Absolutely not. Quite the opposite. Instead, learn how to use gradebook well enough that you can leave comments, do research on things like KIP's report card, their behavioral report card, where students are given feedback around their behavioral areas, but there needs to be separate silos for evaluation and feedback relative to behavior, and evaluation and feedback relative to academic achievement. This is the only responsibility that you all will not be able to complete on your own. What you will need to do is you will need to discuss as a group, okay, we've sort of seen these 5 things. We've heard what Robbie had to say about it. We're thinking about our grade level practice in the past. Now let's go through those 5 and let's talk about ourselves. So this is the electives tab. So the elective teachers will come together and they'll discuss, okay, what are we doing already? Or what are we committing ourselves to do in this area? And what do we have questions about, disagree with, feel is irrelevant, or need more training on? An example would be maybe, okay, already we have times for students to make up work that's incomplete. We have questions about what our retest or redo structure should look like at our grade level. So each of you will, as a team, each team will be responsible for filling out your tab and then emailing me once you've completed all that. And as a result, Deb, Becky, and I will be able to sit down, look over the responses that you all have, and then we'll tailor our support to you based on the information that you share with us here. I know that that was pretty short and quick. The only other expectation related to this is that you do read through the whole document. Please contact me with further questions, and thank you guys for your time.